Public hearings in the impeachment inquiry are less than a day away as two longtime State Department officials will testify about the Trump administration's contacts with Ukraine. The first, Bill Taylor, is the top U.S. diplomat to Ukraine. In his private testimony, Taylor described regular and irregular channels of Ukrainian diplomacy used by the Trump administration. The other is George Kent, a high-level State Department official who oversees affairs in the region. In his deposition, Kent described a, quote, campaign of lies set up by the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to help oust then ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch. Both diplomats alluded to efforts by administration officials to receive a commitment from Ukraine to investigate Democrats in exchange for military aid and an Oval Office meeting. As their appearances draw near, both Democrats and Republicans are refining their messaging strategy. In a letter to his Democratic colleagues, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff laid out rules for the hearings. He also said additional witnesses will be announced this week and that he's evaluating requests from Republicans. CBS News has also obtained a letter from top Republicans detailing their approach to the hearings. They say the call summary released by the president shows no evidence of a pressure campaign, something both leaders deny. Republicans also say the Ukrainian government did not know aid was being held up. And note, Ukraine never did launch the investigations into Democrats. Meanwhile, a new poll from CBS News shows more than half of Americans are unhappy with how the inquiry is being handled by both sides. 52% of Americans say they believe Democrats have done a bad job in their approach to the inquiry. However, 56% say the president has done a bad job in his approach to it as well. So let's bring in Nikole Killion on Capitol Hill and Kevin Cirilli in our Washington bureau. Nikole is a CBS News correspondent. Kevin is chief Washington correspondent for Bloomberg. Welcome to you both. Nikole, I want to start with you. Let's dive into this polling a bit. We saw a majority of Americans are upset at how the president is handling the inquiry, but his approval rating is exactly the same as it was in our July poll. So is that a sign the president will continue his current approach as open hearings begin tomorrow?
Well, I think, yes, you'll continue to see more of the same. I mean, the president has been pretty clear all along that this impeachment inquiry is a scam. It's a hoax in his view, that this is something being led by what he calls do-nothing Democrats. So I think you will see that kind of messaging from him as we head into these impeachment hearings tomorrow. Although I think it's also interesting to note, based on our polling as well, that, folks aren't necessarily satisfied with the way Democrats have been handling the probe either, and that's something I'm sure the president may seize on.
Absolutely. It seems like Americans are not happy with either side in this inquiry. So, Nikole, what is the status of the White House's so-called impeachment response war room?
Well, in terms of these impeachment hearings, we really haven't seen a big ramp up, if you will, or a war room for that matter. Certainly during the Mueller hearings and, after the Mueller report was released, we did see quite an organized strategy and response from the president's team. But this time around, they haven't necessarily taken that same approach. We do know that the White House has brought on some additional officials to handle communications. The former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi, also Tony Sayegh, former Treasury official, both are expected to join the president's team to handle some of these communications, but we don't necessarily expect that they will be in place by the time these hearings start on Wednesday. So that being said, there is kind of this collective shrug at the White House. Our Paula Reed spoke with administration officials who essentially say, look, lawmakers, Democrats in particular, have tried to take this president down on everything from the Mueller report on down, bringing in a variety of witnesses. And so, they really don't see these hearings as being any different as some of these other blockbuster hearings that we've witnessed in the past. Again, whether it's Mueller, whether it was bringing in Michael Cohen, you go on down the list. So that seems to be kind of the response that we're seeing and hearing from the White House, that this is just another stunt in their view from Democrats.
Right. And tomorrow, of course, Kevin, the big day, lots of anticipation. The public testimony begins. So what are the rules being laid out by Democrats for tomorrow's hearings?
It's a great question because there's been some intense back and forth scrutiny with Republicans saying that House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff has not been as fair as they would have liked to see with the rules. But let's clear up any misconceptions that are out there. So Devin Nunes is the top Republican on the committee, and if he wants to call additional witnesses, he has to formally submit that request to the chairman of the Intelligence Committee, Chairman Schiff. Now, should Schiff say no, then Republicans have the opportunity to have the entire Intelligence Committee vote on it, and that's where things could get interesting. Look for Republicans to do two things, in addition to, of course, as Nikole pointed out, following in lockstep the messaging coming from the White House. But in addition to that, look for them to continuously bring up former Vice President Joe Biden to raise concerns about Biden and his son Hunter during these hearings. And this is very much going to be as carefully watched by President Trump as it is by the Biden campaign. And in addition to that, look for them to continue to debate the process and how this is all being constructed, and trying to put forth that this has been something that Democrats have been steamrolling through. Now, when I talk to Democrats, they say that the rules are fair, the rules are standard, and the rules, quite honestly, went up for a vote a couple of weeks ago.
So, Kevin, as we mentioned earlier, and Nikole reiterated, the poll we talked about showed that Americans are not happy with the Democrats' approach to the inquiry either. They're not happy with how the president's handling it. They're not happy with how the Democrats are handling it. And our data also found 73% of Americans with an opinion on impeachment have already made up their minds. So are lawmakers on both sides worried there aren't enough people out there left to sway?
Yes. And I think that's why just a couple of weeks ago when Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was up there and essentially said that there's going to be a quick trial in the Senate, regardless of what happens with impeachment in terms of Speaker Pelosi and the vote that's expected to be held. And for Speaker Pelosi, this presents a difficult political fight to referee. You've got the base of her party fired up, wants to see something done, but you also have now a narrative that has been concocted by Democrats that has completely dwarfed all of the 2020 campaign cycle as it relates to several of the senators who are going to be wanting to split time between Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and having to keep up with the impeachment. I think the one thing that poll shows, though, is that Thanksgiving conversations around the country are going to be contentious and interesting, to say the least.
Oh, my gosh. Hasn't that been the case for several years now in the running? All right.
Yes, absolutely.
So, Nikole, one person it appears we won't hear from is acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney. His lawyer filed a brief today saying he will not intend to pursue litigation with regard to his subpoena, and he's going to instead rely on the direction of the president and simply not show up to testify. So remind us of the backstory a bit. Why was Mulvaney weighing a path through the courts in the first place?
Well, this continues along this path of, again, not wanting to necessarily answer lawmakers' questions here. You know, we've seen kind of this stonewalling approach, if you will, from some administration officials. And so Mick Mulvaney is one who at least appears that he doesn't want to testify. Now, he did try to join on to this lawsuit with other officials, including one of the president's other former national security advisors, deputy national security advisors, Charles Kupperman, who had also been asked to testify. He did file suit trying to get a decision from the courts about whether he had to. And so Mick Mulvaney joined on to that lawsuit, but Kupperman didn't want him to, nor did Democrats for that matter. And so they filed respectively. And then all of a sudden, now we see that Mick Mulvaney has since dropped this idea or this bid to try to join this lawsuit. And so in terms of what this means going forward, certainly lawmakers do continue to want to hear from Mick Mulvaney. They certainly see him as being very key and central in this narrative that Kevin mentioned, the Democrats are trying to paint. And don't forget about that press conference he had at the White House several weeks back, where he more or less suggested that there was a quid pro quo at hand, that military aid to Ukraine Ukraine was held up. Then he walked it back and, put out a different statement. So lawmakers have a lot of questions for Mick Mulvaney, and I think it will remain to be seen exactly how this plays out, if he will ever appear here on Capitol Hill. But certainly he is a witness of high interest if lawmakers can get him. But as of now, it doesn't seem that Mick Mulvaney wants to comply.
And so, Kevin, looking ahead to tomorrow, what will you be listening for from the witnesses in tomorrow's hearing?
Three things. First and foremost, is there any bombshell that would prompt Republican senators, not House members, senators, to take this impeachment proceedings beyond just a political operation, but more into a constitutional operation? The second point is going to be from a 2020 perspective. What does this mean for the Biden campaign? How aggressive are the attacks coming from Republicans against former Vice President Joe Biden? And last but not least, what's the president's response going to be? We are anticipating within the next 24 hours that we're going to hear in some type of way from the president, maybe even at a press conference at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And Mick Mulvaney's role in all of this is really fascinating. Just to add something to what Nikole said, in addition to that, I mean, he filed a legal briefing with the court on a Friday night trying to decide if he should comply with Congress or his boss, President Trump. I mean, it's quite astounding. I think sometimes we lose sight of it, just how much of a political pickle Mick Mulvaney is in, and how he was so open about it in terms of really being candid as to whether or not to comply with congressional subpoenas or to comply with his boss.
It is a little head spinning. We are certainly in some, uncharted constitutional waters here for sure. I just want to follow up on, what the president said he may be doing in the days ahead, because he did say he will be releasing the transcript of an April 21st call he had with Ukraine's leader before the end of this week. So what do we expect to learn from it, and what is the White House hoping to accomplish with it, Kevin?
Tantalizing is how the president tweeted it out. Tantalizing is the word that he used to describe it. It's just another case, candidly, behind the scenes where the White House is saying that once they release these details, once they're transparent about these details, that they're able to defend their boss. You saw that when the president hit the campaign trail just the other week, when you had folks not only sporting their red Make America Great Again hats, but also the Read the Transcript T-shirt. So anecdotally speaking, this has been something that the White House and Republicans have used to seize in terms of fundraising. But the question becomes, where do independents fit in on this? Are they sick of the noise coming out of Washington, and do they blame not just Democrats but the White House for concocting that type of noise? That's really, truthfully, the biggest unknown, is what all of this means for next year.
All right. Well, Nikole, Killion, and Kevin Cirilli, thanks to both of you for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Anytime.